Welcome to Business Recipe. Every business has a recipe. Here's theirs. Today's recipe: Spirit Airlines. $8,169,000. That is what Ted Christie took home in 2024, the year Spirit was burning toward its second bankruptcy. Christie made 102 times more than the median Spirit employee that year. He left before the kitchen burned down. The question isn't whether Spirit was always going to fail. The question is, who knew, and when did they leave? Pattern interrupt, title card, SWNPHISM, the ingredients, BGM, methodical kitchen ambience begins. Every recipe starts with what you put in. Spirit's ingredients were deregulation, a price promise nobody could keep, and a business model borrowed from an era that no longer existed. The bear fare model was elegant. Strip every amenity, charge separately for bags and seat selection, pass the savings through the base ticket price. A $29 flight from Fort Lauderdale to Atlanta. It worked when labor was cheap, fuel was cheap, and legacy carriers weren't paying attention. All three of those conditions eventually changed. Then there was the ingredient nobody planned for. Pratt Whitney's GTF engine, powering Spirit's Airbus A320 family, was recalled for mandatory inspections industry-wide. 38 Spirit aircraft were grounded. Not idle, generating zero revenue, while Spirit paid over $30 million per month in lease obligations on aircraft that couldn't fly. $30 million a month. For planes not in the air. The P&W crisis didn't create Spirit's problem. It just guaranteed there was no margin left when anything else went wrong. Spirit's 2024 operating margin: negative 22.5%. Asset turnover ratio: 0.48, against a healthy benchmark of 0.70, not a cyclical problem. A structural measure of how efficiently the business was running. The ULCC model requires everything to go right. Cheap labor, cheap fuel, high utilization, no disruptions. In aviation, nothing always goes right. The man running this kitchen came from Frontier Airlines, CFO there from 2008 to 2010. Frontier is today the only ULCC with a positive operating margin, plus 2.28% in 2024. Christie spent 8 years at the airline that eventually got the model right. Then 13 years at the one that didn't. Those were the ingredients. But ingredients don't matter if the method is built to fail. And the method was built on a number that was wrong from the day it was written. Pattern interrupt, title card, with ETHM, the method, BGM, rising kitchen tension. Spirit's method, price below everyone, capture volume, fund the losses until scale made the math work. Scale never arrived, and then a judge made sure it never would. JetBlue offered Spirit a $3.8 billion exit ramp. The DOJ sued to block it. January 2024, U.S. District Judge William Young sided with the DOJ. His ruling stated that Spirit's presence in a market caused rival airlines to cut fares by 7 to 11%. The court protected the $29 ticket by keeping Spirit independent. Keeping Spirit independent eventually killed the $29 ticket anyway. JetBlue paid Spirit a $69 million termination fee in March 2024, money that lasted Spirit about 3 months at its rate of cash burn. November 2024. Chapter 11, annual losses exceeding $1.2 billion. The plan: cut debt from $7.4 billion to $2.1 billion. Reduce the fleet from 214 to 100 aircraft. Furlough 1,800 flight attendants. The plan looked viable, if the math held. And the math rested on one central assumption, buried in the restructuring documents, confirmed by the court. Jet fuel. $2.24 per gallon for 2026. That was the number everything was built on. Find the number. Always find the number. One more ingredient. One passengers only discover when it's too late. Spirit deliberately chose not to establish interline agreements with other airlines. When Spirit cancels, the passenger holds a ticket no other airline is contractually obligated to honor. Spirit chose the contested markets. Spirit chose the bear fare structure. Spirit chose no interline agreements. Every choice was deliberate. The consequences were, too. The method was wrong, but the outcome didn't have to be final, until the war in Iran sent fuel to $4.32 a gallon and revealed that the entire restructuring plan was built on a number that was $2.08 too low. Pattern interrupt. Title card. Filthy Kachakataya, what came out of the oven? BGM pressure building. February 24, 2026. Spirit announced it expected to exit Chapter 11 by late spring. 8 weeks later, the plan was dead. The Iran war disrupted oil markets in late February 2026. By April 16th, jet fuel hit $4.32 per gallon. Spirit's plan assumed $2.24, 93% above the plan's core assumption. JP Morgan's analysis, at $4.60 per gallon sustained, Spirit's projected margin collapses from positive 0.5 to approximately negative 20%. Additional annual cost? $360 million? Spirit's entire cash balance at end of 2025. Less than that. That is not a headwind. That is a wall. August 29, 2025. Spirit filed Chapter 11 for the second time. Twice in 9 months. Net losses for 2025, approximately $2.76 billion. DIP financing to keep the lights on? $475 million. Fred Cromer, the CFO, announced the fleet cuts. 114 aircraft gone, a carrier reduced to half its former scale. Spirit requested hundreds of millions in emergency government funding. The Trump administration's response, a $500 million rescue package, in exchange for warrants giving the government up to a 90% equity stake in the airline. 90%. The administration that opposes government intervention in markets was prepared to effectively nationalize a bankrupt budget airline. Trump called it a final proposal in late April. Several Republican members of Congress immediately called it a terrible idea. May 1, 2026. Talks collapsed. Bondholders couldn't align. Spirit was preparing to cease operations. BGM ducks to near silence. Title card, the other side of the argument. Two arguments worth taking seriously. First, Frontier and Allegiant are profitable. Spirit's failure doesn't prove cheap. Air travel is impossible. True, but the details matter. Allegiant flies Peoria to Destin, not Chicago to Miami. It operates where legacy carriers don't bother, which gives it pricing power Spirit never had. Frontier pulled back from the contested hub markets. Spirit competed everywhere on price. That is not the same model. Second, bailouts for essential infrastructure can be appropriate, true in principle. But the math was not hindsight. Spirit's negative 22% margin, its 224 fuel assumption, its halved fleet, all known before the bailout was proposed. A $500 million rescue would have covered the $360 million annual fuel overage for about 14 months. Then the structural problem returns. That is not an emergency bridge. That is a structural subsidy of an uneconomic business model. BGM returns. The oven produced 2 bankruptcies and a failed bailout, but the recipe had a human cost, and that cost didn't get written into any SEC filing. Pattern interrupt. Title card, Kinthy Keen, Who Ate It? BGM, documentary wait, slow and real. Back to Ted Christie and his $4,390,000 bonus. While he was collecting the stability premium, a payment the SEC proxy described as necessary to promote stability during the restructuring, 1,800 people received different paperwork. December 1st, 2025. 1/3 of Spirit's flight attendant workforce furloughed. Las Vegas, 393. Detroit, 103. Chicago O'Hare, more than 60. 270 pilots furloughed October 1st. 140 captains demoted November 1st. Sarah Nelson, president of the Association of Flight Attendants, went directly to the White House, warning that nearly 20,000 Spirit employees faced permanent job loss. Fort Lauderdale International Airport, May 2026. Sarah Burgett, a Spirit flyer at the gate. We've flown Spirit off and on for a long time. I've never had a problem with Spirit. Sunjoha Niese, same airport, looking at the board. It's going to affect the economy itself and the people too. I wish there was a way out. There is no automatic way out. Spirit has no interline agreements. When the airline stops flying, its passengers hold tickets no other carrier is contractually obligated to honor. Travel journalist Peter Greenberg, you're going to be forced to pay a much higher fare on a competing carrier. 1.7 million passengers per month were built into a business model as the load-bearing ingredient. They didn't know they were in the recipe. Christie stepped down April 6, 2025, 26 days after Spirit emerged from its first bankruptcy. Matt Klein, the chief commercial officer, left the same day. 4 months later, Spirit filed its second bankruptcy. Christie's 2024 compensation, $8,169,000. Separation payment, over $1.5 million. Median Spirit employee, $80,000. Christie earned 102 times that. That is not an accusation. That is a compensation disclosure. The SEC proxy says it. The ratio says it. What the filing does not say is what it felt like to receive a WARN Act notice in Las Vegas while the chef collected his separation pay. Here's what the recipe actually produced. Cheap air travel for as long as the math held. Then it stopped. The people who built the model were insulated from its failure. The people who flew on it were not. Christie got his retention bonus for stability. The employees got WARN Act notices. That asymmetry is not unique to Spirit. It is the design of the recipe. So what do you watch for? The 3 signs a business recipe is going to fail the people who depend on it before it fails. Pattern interrupt, title card, 3 cyan, 3 signs, BGM, resolving analytical quiet confidence, 3 warning signs, each visible before the second bankruptcy, none requiring hindsight. Sign 1. A model with no operational buffer is not a business plan. It is a prayer. Spirit's asset turnover of 0.48 versus the benchmark of 0.70 was a structural reading, not a bad streak. When a business requires cheap labor, cheap fuel, no disruptions, and no competitive response, simultaneously, ask what the plan is when one of those changes. Spirit's plan was to ask the government for $500 million. That is not a plan. That is the absence of one. Sign 2. Retention bonuses during a crisis tell you the executive's timeline, not the company's stability. Spirit paid Christie $3.8 million to stay stable during the restructuring. He left 26 days after it resolved. The premium didn't buy stability, it bought a scheduled departure. Sign 3. Find the number every plan is built on, and stress test it at 50% wrong. Spirit's plan, $2.24 per gallon. The Iran war sent fuel to $4.32, 93% above the plan assumption. Every restructuring has a core number. Find it. The creditors found it. The court confirmed it. The bondholders signed off on it. None of them asked, what if this number is $2 too high? The $29 ticket was never free. It was borrowed from the future, and eventually somebody had to pay it back. BGM, BR theme begins. If this recipe opened a lens for you, the business recipe lens. Ingredients first, method second, follow who ate it, then subscribe. Because next week we're reading a different recipe, one where the kitchen is still burning, and the executives haven't left yet. Today's recipe, complete. 3 transferable signs. 1. A model with no operational buffer is a prayer, not a business plan. Measure asset turnover ratios. 2. Retention bonuses during crises that are followed by immediate executive departures signal the insider's timeline, not the company's stability. 3. Every restructuring plan has a number at its center. Find it and stress test it against a 50% deviation before trusting the plan. If this recipe opened a lens for you, the business recipe lens. Ingredients first, method second, follow who ate it, then subscribe. Because next week, we're reading a different recipe. One where the kitchen is still burning, and the executives haven't left yet. So, what business should we crack open next? Drop the company name in the comments. We read them. If you want more case studies like this one, subscribe. New recipe every Tuesday.